The 17-year-old CEO slammed his fist on the mahogany conference table, his voice cracking slightly with the weight of inherited authority. "If you can make my grandfather remember anything for more than 5 minutes, I'll double your salary." The executives around the table shifted uncomfortably, but Denise Washington simply nodded once, her 15 years of geriatric care experience teaching her to hear desperation beneath the bravado. The stakes were crystal clear, $40 million hanging in the balance of a corporate merger that required the legal approval of a patriarch whose Alzheimer's had been stealing pieces of his mind for 3 years. The Hartwell furniture empire stretched across 5 southern states, built from a single storefront in downtown Atlanta back in 1962. Now the family's Buckhead mansion felt more like a medical facility than a home, with hospital bed rails installed in the master bedroom and pill organizers lined up on every surface. Young Marcus Hartwell had inherited control of the company at 16 when his parents died in a car accident on I-285, but his grandfather's signature was still required for any major business decision. The old man hadn't recognized his own reflection in weeks. 3 previous caregivers had failed spectacularly. The first, a certified nursing assistant, had tried forcing cognitive exercises that only frustrated and agitated him. The second had simply ignored his preferences entirely, treating him like a medical case rather than a person. The third had quit after he stopped recognizing her face, claiming it was too heartbreaking to watch. Each failure had cost valuable time as his condition worsened, and now the legal deadline loomed just 30 days away. Denise arrived on a Tuesday morning, when the Georgia humidity was already thick enough to cut. She found Marcus pacing the marble foyer, checking his Rolex every few minutes like time itself might bend to his will. "The investors are breathing down my neck," he said without preamble. "Grandpa Joe built this company to last generations, but he's been against this merger since day one. Now he can barely remember my name half the time, but legally we still need his consent." "Tell me about the good days," Denise said, setting down her worn leather bag near the front door. "When does he seem most like himself?" Marcus paused mid-stride. "I don't know. Maybe afternoons. He used to take me to that Waffle House on Peachtree when I was little. Sometimes he still asks about the boy, like I'm still 8 years old." Denise spent the first week simply watching. She observed how Joseph Hartwell's eyes tracked the light moving across the hardwood floors, how he calmed when she played the old Philco radio to WSB AM, and how his fingers moved in precise motions when he folded and refolded cloth napkins at breakfast. Most importantly, she noticed the window. Between 3 and 5 in the afternoon, something shifted behind his clouded gaze. "He's not gone," she told Marcus on Friday evening as they stood in the kitchen while the old man napped. "His long-term memory is still largely intact. The pathways are just harder to access. We need to work with his brain, not against it." Marcus drummed his fingers against the granite countertop. "The lawyers need a clear answer about the merger in 3 weeks. Can you get him there or not?" Denise had learned not to make promises she couldn't keep, but she'd also learned that sometimes the impossible just required a different approach. If this resonates with you, consider subscribing to hear how this story unfolds. The breakthrough came during week 2, completely by accident. Denise had been playing Perry Como's Catch a Falling Star on the old radio, when Joseph suddenly sat up straighter in his chair and said clear as day, Margaret loved this song. Margaret was his wife of 52 years, dead now for 8. It was the first coherent sentence he'd spoken in months. "Tell me about Margaret," Denise said gently, pulling a chair closer to his. "She wore blue," he said, his voice stronger now. "Always wore blue, said it brought out her eyes." He paused, looking around the room as if seeing it for the first time. "Is she coming for dinner?" Instead of correcting him, Denise nodded. "She's probably getting ready. You know how she likes to look nice." She had learned that validation therapy worked better than constant reality checks. Meet the person where they are, then gently guide them forward. Over the following days, she built on these moments. She brought in photographs from different decades, focusing on images from the 1950s and 1960s when his memories seemed strongest. She discovered that the smell of coffee percolating in the old aluminum pot could trigger recognition, and that certain textures, particularly the silk scarf Margaret used to wear, would calm him during agitated periods. Marcus watched these improvements with growing amazement and impatience in equal measure. "He remembered my middle name yesterday," he told his assistant over the phone while Denise prepared lunch. "But then 10 minutes later he asked if I was the mailman. How is that possible?" The answer came from Dr. Patricia Chen at Piedmont Hospital, whom Denise had quietly consulted. "Alzheimer's doesn't erase memories uniformly," she explained during a brief meeting in the hospital parking lot. "Think of it like a library where someone keeps moving the card catalogue. The books are still there, you just need different ways to find them." But progress wasn't linear. During week 3, Joseph fell in the bathroom at 2 a.m. confused and trying to find Margaret. The emergency room visit revealed that his previous doctor had him on a medication combination that was actually worsening his cognitive symptoms. After the medication adjustment, his lucid periods grew longer and more predictable. "This is it," Marcus said, pacing the hospital waiting room while his grandfather underwent additional tests. "This is our chance. If he's really getting better, maybe he can understand what's at stake with the merger." Denise studied the young man's face, seeing something she'd missed before. "What do you think he'd want? If he were completely himself right now, what would he choose?" Marcus stopped pacing. "He always said the company was more than just money. He cared about the families who worked for us, the customers who trusted us." He sat down heavily in one of the plastic chairs. "The merger would probably mean layoffs. Grandpa Joe would hate that." "Then why are you considering it?" "Because $40 million is $40 million, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Because I'm 17 and everyone keeps telling me I don't know what I'm doing." The real test came during week 4. Marcus had arranged for the family attorney, Harold Brennan, to meet with them at the house for an informal assessment of Joseph's mental capacity. If he could demonstrate basic understanding of the business decision, they could proceed with confidence. If not, Marcus would have to make the choice alone, with all the legal and financial complications that would follow. Joseph was having a particularly clear afternoon when Brennan arrived. Denise had timed it perfectly for his optimal window, and she'd prepared the environment with familiar music playing softly and the late afternoon light streaming through the windows just right. "Mr. Hartwell," Brennan began formally, "I need to ask you some questions about your company and the proposed merger with Southern Comfort Furniture." Joseph's posture straightened. Even through the fog of his illness, the mention of business seemed to activate something deep in his mind. "Southern Comfort," he repeated slowly. "Those people from Nashville." "Yes, sir. They're offering to purchase Hartwell Furniture for $40 million. Joseph was quiet for a long moment, his fingers working that familiar pattern of folding and unfolding a cloth napkin. Then he looked up, and his eyes were completely clear. "Are they going to keep our people?" Brennan glanced at Marcus. "There would likely be some consolidation of operations." "That means firing good people who've worked for us for years," Joseph said, his voice growing stronger. "Margaret and I built this company on the promise that if you showed up and did honest work, you'd have a job as long as we had a business to run." He turned to Marcus. "Boy, you remember what I told you about taking care of the folks who take care of you?" Marcus felt something shift in his chest. "Yes, sir." "Then you know what we have to do." Joseph's voice was firm, decisive. "Brennan, you tell those Nashville folks that Hartwell Furniture isn't for sale. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever." The attorney scribbled notes rapidly. "Mr. Hartwell, you understand this is a significant financial opportunity." "I understand that some things matter more than money," Joseph replied. "Our reputation, our responsibility to our employees, the promise we made to serve families, not shareholders." As if the effort of that clarity had exhausted him, Joseph settled back in his chair, but he looked satisfied. "Denise," he called out, Could you put on that Perry Como record? Margaret always loved that song. 3 months later, Hartwell Furniture announced a new employee benefit program, comprehensive elder care support for all workers with aging family members. The program, developed in consultation with Denise Washington, now the company's Director of Family Services, included caregiver training, flexible scheduling for family responsibilities, and partnerships with local geriatric specialists. Marcus kept his promise about doubling Denise's salary, but more importantly, he kept his grandfather's promise about taking care of the people who took care of the business. Joseph's lucid moments became less frequent as the months passed, but the afternoon music sessions continued, and he still smiled when he heard Perry Como singing about catching falling stars. The merger papers were formally rejected, and within a year, Hartwell Furniture had opened 3 new locations across Georgia, funded by smaller investors who shared the family's values about treating employees like family. The company's motto, displayed in every store, read, "Built to last, built to care." The weeks following the merger rejection brought new challenges. Joseph's condition fluctuated wildly, some days crystal clear, others lost in decades-old conversations with people long gone. Denise developed what she privately called the dance, a careful choreography of timing, environment, and patience that maximized his good moments while minimizing the difficult ones. He asked for his father this morning, Marcus confided during one of their evening check-ins. His father died when I was 3, but he was so insistent I didn't know what to tell him. You don't have to fix his reality, Denise explained, adjusting the old man's medication schedule on the kitchen counter. Sometimes the kindest thing is to step into his world instead of dragging him into ours. What did you say? I told him Dad was at the office, working late. He seemed satisfied with that. Denise nodded approvingly. That's perfect. You're learning to meet him where he is. The real test of their progress came during the monthly board meeting in November. The other executives, mostly family friends who'd known Joseph for decades, wanted to see for themselves if the old man was truly capable of participating in business decisions. Word had spread about his decisive rejection of the merger, and some questioned whether it represented genuine understanding or merely a lucky moment of clarity. We need to be absolutely certain, said Robert Kellerman, the company's longtime CFO, as he settled into his chair around the conference table. If Joe's really back, even partially, the family needs to know, and if he's not, he didn't finish the sentence. Marcus had been dreading this moment. He'd grown protective of his grandfather's dignity over the past months, seeing how hard Denise worked to preserve what remained of the man's autonomy. But he also understood the business reality. If Joseph couldn't meaningfully participate in major decisions, the company would need different legal structures going forward. He has good days and bad days, Marcus said carefully. But when he's clear, he's really clear. Denise has been incredible at helping us understand his patterns. Denise had strategically scheduled the meeting for 3:30 p.m., right in the middle of Joseph's most reliable window of lucidity. She'd also made subtle environmental adjustments. The meeting was held in the familiar conference room at the main store rather than the corporate offices. She'd arranged for his favorite afternoon snack of buttermilk biscuits and sweet tea, and she'd made sure Perry Como was playing softly in the background. When they wheeled Joseph into the room, he looked around with obvious recognition. "Board meeting," he said clearly. "Haven't been to one of these in a while." "Hello, Joe," said Kellerman gently. "How are you feeling today?" "Like I'm 93 years old and my brain's full of holes," Joseph replied with surprising humor. "But I'm here, aren't I?" The group spent the next hour discussing routine business matters, and Joseph followed along remarkably well. He asked pointed questions about quarterly sales figures, expressed concern about rising material costs, and even suggested a promotional strategy for the upcoming holiday season. But the real moment came when they brought up staffing decisions. One of the newer board members, a young man named Timothy Walsh, who represented some outside investors, suggested they could cut labor costs by reducing hours for part-time employees. Joseph's expression sharpened. "Timothy, is it? How long have you worked with furniture?" "Well, sir, I'm more on the financial side." "That's what I thought." Joseph's voice carried the authority of 5 decades in business. "Let me tell you something about this industry, son. People don't just buy a couch or a dining room table. They're buying the place where their family will gather for birthdays and holidays and homework sessions. They're investing in the backdrop for their most important memories." He paused, looking around the table at faces he'd known for years. "And the people who sell them that furniture, who help them choose the right piece and deliver it to their homes, those people are part of that story. You start treating them like disposable line items on a spreadsheet, and pretty soon you're selling disposable furniture to disposable customers." The room was completely quiet. Even Timothy Walsh seemed to understand he'd just received a masterclass in business philosophy. "Now," Joseph continued, "what were we saying about the Nashville folks? Are they still sniffing around?" "We rejected their offer, Grandpa Joe," Marcus said softly. "Just like you wanted." "Good," the old man smiled. "Margaret would have approved. She always said that once you start selling your values for money, you end up with neither." After the meeting, as the board members filed out, Kellerman pulled Marcus aside. "I've known your grandfather since you were in diapers," he said quietly. "What I saw in there today, that wasn't just a good day. That was Joe Hartwell, the man who built this company from nothing. Whatever you and Denise are doing, keep doing it." But the victory was temporary. That evening, Joseph had his worst episode in weeks. He became agitated and confused, insisting that he was late for his wedding and demanding that someone drive him to the church. When Marcus tried to calm him, the old man didn't recognize him at all. "Where's my grandson?" Joseph kept asking, looking right at Marcus. "The boy with the dark hair? He's supposed to be here." Denise worked through the night, trying every technique in her arsenal. Music didn't help. Familiar objects only seemed to increase his agitation. Even the photographs that usually grounded him in reality couldn't break through the fog that had descended. "Maybe we pushed too hard today," Marcus said, exhausted and worried, as they sat in the kitchen at 3 a.m. while Joseph finally slept. "The board meeting, all those people—" "This isn't about today," Denise said firmly. "This is the disease. It doesn't follow our timeline or our wishes. Some days we get the man you remember, and some days we don't. That doesn't make the good days any less real or valuable." She was right, of course, but that didn't make it easier to watch. The next morning, Joseph woke up calm but distant, treating Marcus like a polite stranger and asking Denise when the family would be coming to visit. The pattern continued for weeks. Brilliant moments of clarity followed by stretches of confusion. Days when he could discuss complex business strategies, followed by afternoons when he couldn't remember how to use a fork. Through it all, Denise maintained her careful routines, adjusting and adapting based on what each day brought. The breakthrough that changed everything came from an unexpected source. Marcus had been going through old family papers in the study, looking for documents the lawyers needed, when he found a leather portfolio tucked behind some books. Inside were dozens of letters his grandfather had written to his grandmother during their courtship in the 1940s, along with her replies. "Look at this," he said, showing Denise one of the letters over breakfast. He wrote to her every week for 3 years before they got married. "Listen to this. My dearest Margaret, today I saw a blue dress in the window of Miller's department store, and I thought of how beautiful you would look wearing it to our wedding someday." Denise studied the letter, noting the careful handwriting and formal language. These are from his courtship period. Those memories might be deeply embedded. Have you ever read them to him? They tried it that afternoon during his optimal window. Marcus sat beside his grandfather's chair and began reading one of the love letters aloud. At first, Joseph seemed only mildly interested, but as Marcus continued, something shifted in the old man's expression. "I wrote that," Joseph said suddenly, his voice filled with wonder. "I remember writing that exact letter. I was working at the hardware store, saving up money for an engagement ring." He looked at Marcus with complete recognition. You're my grandson, Marcus. You look just like your father did at your age." "Yes, sir," Marcus said, his throat tight with emotion. "And you," Joseph turned to Denise. "You're the lady who's been taking such good care of me." "Denise, I remember now." For the next hour, they read through more letters, and with each one, Joseph seemed to become more himself. He shared stories about his courtship with Margaret, about building the business from a single storefront, about the values that had guided every major decision he'd made. "You know," he said, as the afternoon light began to fade, "I've been thinking about those Nashville people, about the merger." Marcus tensed. They hadn't discussed business since the board meeting weeks ago. "I know I already said no," Joseph continued, "but I want to make sure you understand why. It's not that I'm against change or growth. It's that some things shouldn't be for sale. The trust our customers have in us, the loyalty of our employees, the promise we made to treat people right." He reached over and took Marcus's hand. "You're young, and you're going to face a lot of pressure to make the quick, easy choice. But remember what I'm telling you now. The right choice and the easy choice are usually different things." "I understand, Grandpa Joe." "Good." The old man smiled. "Now, could you put on some music? Perry Como, if you have it. Margaret always loved when he sang Catch a Falling Star." As winter turned to spring, the pattern became more established. Joseph's good days were fewer, but more predictable. The letter-reading sessions became a daily ritual, sometimes triggering remarkable periods of clarity and connection. Marcus learned to treasure these moments without demanding more than each day could give. The business continued to thrive under their new philosophy. The employee care program that Denise had developed became a model for other family-owned companies across the South. Workers who might have left for higher wages at competitors stayed because they knew their families would be supported during difficult times. "We're getting calls from business schools," Marcus told his grandfather during one of their good afternoons. "They want to study our employee retention strategies. Apparently what we're doing is pretty unusual in today's market." Joseph nodded approvingly. "Your grandmother always said that taking care of people wasn't just the right thing to do. It was good business. Happy employees make happy customers." The final test of their approach came in late spring, when Southern Comfort Furniture made one last attempt to acquire Hartwell. This time, they offered $60 million and promised to keep all existing employees for at least 2 years. Marcus brought the offer to his grandfather on a Tuesday afternoon during his most reliable window of clarity. They sat in the sunroom overlooking Margaret's garden, which Denise had helped restore as a therapeutic space. "60 million, Joseph repeated slowly. "That's a lot of money." "Yes, sir. It would set the family up for generations." Joseph was quiet for a long time, watching the light play through the leaves outside. "Tell me something, grandson. When you look at our employees, what do you see?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I see people who've helped build something important, people who trust us to keep our promises. And when you look at our customers, I see families who've been shopping with us for decades, people who know they can count on us for quality and service." Joseph smiled. "Then you already know what the answer has to be, don't you?" Marcus nodded. "The money isn't worth what we'd lose." "Exactly. Some things can't be bought or sold. They can only be earned and preserved." Joseph reached for his grandson's hand. "I'm proud of the man you're becoming. Your parents would be proud too." The rejection of the second offer was swift and final. Within months, Southern Comfort Furniture filed for bankruptcy, a victim of their own cost-cutting strategies and reputation for poor customer service. Hartwell Furniture, meanwhile, expanded to 2 new states, powered by word-of-mouth recommendations and employee referrals. 6 months later, Joseph's condition had declined significantly, but the foundations they'd built held strong. Denise had trained a full care team using the techniques they'd developed together. Marcus had grown into his role as CEO, making decisions based on the values his grandfather had instilled rather than purely financial considerations. The last fully lucid conversation Joseph had with his grandson happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon in August. They were sitting in the same sunroom where they'd rejected the final merger offer, listening to Perry Como on the old radio. "I want you to know something," Joseph said, his voice weaker now but still clear. "These past months, watching you grow into leadership, seeing how you treat people with respect and dignity, it's been the best gift an old man could ask for. I learned it from you, Grandpa Joe. Maybe, but you chose to listen. That was your decision." Joseph smiled. "And Denise, she's been like family to us. I hope you'll always remember what she taught us about seeing the person inside the illness." "I will." "Good. Now I'm getting tired, but before I rest, I want to hear that Perry Como song one more time. The one about catching falling stars." As the familiar melody filled the room, Joseph closed his eyes and smiled. It was the last time he would remember the song, or recognize Marcus's face, or speak his grandson's name. But it was enough. A year later, Hartwell Furniture established the Joseph and Margaret Hartwell Foundation, dedicated to supporting family caregivers and advancing research into dignity-centered elder care. Denise Washington served as its first director, using her experience to help other families navigate the challenges of caring for loved ones with dementia. Marcus, now 18 and legally able to make all business decisions himself, never wavered from the principles his grandfather had taught him. The company continued to grow, but always with the understanding that profit and humanity weren't opposing forces. They were partners in building something that would last. The old Philco radio still plays in the company's main showroom, tuned to WSBAM, playing the music of Joseph's generation for anyone who might need to catch a falling star and hold it in their memory. But that wasn't the end of the story. 2 years after Joseph's passing, Denise received a call that would change everything she thought she knew about the impact they'd made together. It was Dr. Elena Rodriguez from the Emory University School of Medicine, and she had news that would have made the old man smile. "Ms. Washington," Dr. Rodriguez said over the phone, "we've been following the work you did with the Hartwell family, and we'd like to offer you something unprecedented. We want you to head up a new research initiative studying what we're calling dignity-centered dementia care. Your methods have produced results we frankly didn't think were possible." Denise sat in her small apartment in Virginia Highland, the same neighborhood where she'd grown up, looking out at the tree-lined street where children played and neighbors knew each other's names. The irony wasn't lost on her that she'd spent years caring for a wealthy white family in Buckhead, while living in a community that had been home to working-class black families for generations. "What kind of results are you talking about?" she asked. "We've been tracking 12 families who implemented your protocols over the past 18 months. Compared to traditional memory care approaches, your patients showed 30% longer periods of lucidity, 40% fewer behavioral episodes, and most remarkably, 60% better family satisfaction scores. Marcus Hartwell has been generous enough to share your detailed notes and methodologies." The research study that followed became groundbreaking. What Denise had developed through intuition and experience, the medical community now recognized as a revolutionary approach to dementia care. The key principles were deceptively simple: work with the person's remaining abilities rather than focusing on their deficits, create environments that supported their best moments rather than highlighting their worst, and above all, treat dignity as a medical necessity, not a luxury. The first major validation came when CNN featured the Hartwell story as part of a series on innovative approaches to America's aging crisis. The segment aired on a Tuesday evening in March, and by Wednesday morning, Denise's phone hadn't stopped ringing. "I saw you on television," said one caller, an elderly woman from Birmingham whose voice shook with emotion. "My husband has been getting worse and worse, and the doctors keep telling me there's nothing we can do. But what you did for that family, do you think it might work for us too?" The calls came from across the country. Families in rural Montana dealing with a patriarch who'd built a ranch from nothing but couldn't remember his grandchildren's names. A retired teacher in Minneapolis whose brilliant mind was being eroded by Lewy body dementia. A Korean War veteran in San Diego whose family watched helplessly as his personality disappeared behind the fog of Alzheimer's. Each story was different, but the underlying pain was universal, the helpless feeling of watching someone you love disappear while their body remained. Denise found herself becoming not just a caregiver, but a translator between the world of medical professionals and the desperate families who just wanted their loved ones to be treated with respect. The breakthrough that established her credibility in the broader medical community came through an unexpected partnership. Dr. James Morrison, a neurologist at the Atlanta VA Medical Center, had been struggling with his own father's dementia when he saw the CNN segment. His father, a World War II veteran who had landed at Normandy, was becoming increasingly agitated and unresponsive to traditional treatments. "I'm willing to try anything," Dr. Morrison told Denise during their first meeting at the VA hospital. "Traditional protocols aren't working, and I'm watching my father disappear." Working with Dr. Morrison's father, Denise, discovered that his agitation decreased dramatically when she played 1940s big band music during his late afternoon sundowning episodes. More importantly, she found that when she spoke to him about his military service, not as if it were ancient history, but as if it were a current source of pride and identity, his posture would straighten and his eyes would focus. "Tell me about your unit," she would say, and suddenly the confused elderly man would transform into the confident young soldier he had once been. "We were the Fighting 29th, he would reply, his voice strong and clear. "Blue and Grey Division. We trained in England for 2 years before D-Day." These moments of clarity, triggered by connecting with deeply embedded memories of purpose and achievement, became the foundation for what would later be called the identity-based memory protocol. Instead of trying to orient patients to present reality, caregivers learned to step into the patient's strongest memories and use those as bridges to better functioning in the present. The protocol's effectiveness was demonstrated most dramatically during a pilot program at 3 nursing homes across Georgia. Traditional memory care units typically saw patients decline at predictable rates, with increasing behavioral problems and decreasing family engagement. But the facilities that implemented Denise's approach saw remarkable changes. At Sunset Manor in Decatur, the changes were visible within weeks. Instead of the typical institutional atmosphere where residents sat passively watching television, the common areas came alive with activity. Staff members learned each resident's personal history and incorporated those details into daily care. The former elementary school principal helped organize daily activities. The retired mechanic was given simple tools to tinker with. The grandmother, who had raised 7 children, was asked to help fold laundry and sort photographs. "It's like we gave them permission to be themselves again," said Patricia Williams, the facilities director. "We stopped trying to make them fit into our systems and started building systems that fit them." The measurable outcomes were even more impressive than the anecdotal evidence. Emergency room visits dropped by 45%. Use of anti-anxiety medications decreased by 30%. Most significantly, family visit frequency increased by 60%, as relatives found their loved ones more recognizable and responsive. Word of these results reached the Centers for Disease Control, which commissioned a larger study across 12 states. The research team, led by Dr. Rodriguez and including Denise as a key consultant, tracked over 800 dementia patients for 2 years. The results, published in the Journal of the American Geriatric Society, established dignity-centered care as a legitimate and effective alternative to traditional medical management approaches. But for Denise, The real validation came from the families themselves. Letters arrived weekly from adult children who had reconnected with parents they thought they'd lost forever. Video messages showed elderly patients singing songs they'd forgotten they knew, or laughing at jokes that reached through decades of accumulated confusion. One letter, from a daughter in Phoenix, captured what Denise had been trying to articulate for years. "You didn't cure my mother's Alzheimer's, but you gave us back the parts of her that the disease hadn't touched yet. You helped us see that she was still there, just harder to reach." That made all the difference in how we spent her final years. The success led to consulting opportunities with major healthcare systems across the country. Kaiser Permanente implemented dignity-centered protocols in their California facilities. The Mayo Clinic invited Denise to develop training programs for their staff. Medicare began considering coverage for what they termed therapeutic biography development, the process of creating detailed personal histories that could guide individualized care approaches. Yet, despite the national recognition, Denise never forgot where the work had started. She maintained a close relationship with Marcus, now running a furniture empire that had expanded to 8 states while maintaining its commitment to employee-centered values. The Joseph and Margaret Hartwell Foundation, which she continued to direct, became a model for how successful businesses could give back to their communities in meaningful ways. "You know what Grandpa Joe would have loved about all this?" Marcus said during one of their quarterly foundation board meetings. They were sitting in the same conference room where Joseph had made his final business decisions, the room where he'd chosen values over profit. "He would have loved that we found a way to make caring for people profitable, not in a cynical way, but in a way that proves you can do well by doing good." The foundation's impact extended far beyond dementia care. They funded research into affordable home modifications that allowed elderly people to age in place safely. They provided grants for family caregiver support groups and respite care programs. They sponsored training programs for healthcare workers who wanted to specialize in dignity-centered elder care. Most importantly, they changed the conversation about aging in America. Instead of viewing dementia as a tragedy to be endured, families began to see it as a different stage of life that required different approaches but didn't negate a person's fundamental worth and identity. The transformation was perhaps most visible in the Hartwell furniture stores themselves. Each location now featured a memory corner, a comfortable seating area with vintage music playing, old magazines available for browsing, and staff trained to recognize when elderly customers might be experiencing confusion or distress. Instead of treating these moments as disruptions to business, employees learned to see them as opportunities to provide the kind of patient, respectful service that built lifelong customer loyalty. "We've found that when you create an environment where people with cognitive challenges feel welcome and valued, everyone feels more comfortable," explained Sarah Chen, who managed the Marietta location. "Our customer service scores have never been higher, and our staff turnover has dropped to almost 0. Turns out that training people to be more compassionate makes them better at their jobs across the board." The ripple effects extended to the broader community as well. Other Atlanta businesses began adopting similar approaches, creating what local media dubbed dementia-friendly districts, where elderly people and their families could shop, dine, and engage in community life without fear of judgment or discrimination. The Atlanta Beltline, the city's popular trail and park system, added memory stations featuring photographs and artifacts from different eras of Atlanta history. Families found that taking loved ones with dementia on these walks often triggered stories and memories that had seemed lost forever. Local restaurants trained servers to be patient with customers who might take longer to order or need assistance reading menus. Walgreens and CVS locations began offering quiet hours, specifically designed for customers who might be overwhelmed by crowds and noise. Even MARTA, the city's public transportation system, implemented protocols for assisting passengers who seemed confused or disoriented. 5 years after Joseph Hartwell's death, Denise was invited to speak at the International Conference on Aging in Geneva, Switzerland. As she stood before an audience of healthcare professionals from around the world, she thought about the journey that had brought her from a desperate young CEO's challenge to this moment of global recognition. "I want to tell you about an old man who taught me that dignity isn't something you earn or lose," she began. "It's something you have simply by being human. And I want to tell you about a young man who learned that the most profitable business strategy of all is treating people like they matter." The presentation, which would later be viewed over 2 million times on YouTube, centered around 3 simple principles that had emerged from her work with the Hartwell family: meet people where they are, honor who they've been, and support who they're becoming. "We spend so much time focusing on what people with dementia have lost that we forget to celebrate what they still have," she said. "Every person carries within them decades of experience, wisdom, love, and achievement. Our job isn't to mourn the loss of their short-term memory. Our job is to help them access the treasures that are still there, waiting to be discovered." The speech led to invitations from governments around the world. The United Kingdom's National Health Service implemented dignity-centered protocols in their memory care facilities. Japan incorporated the approach into their national strategy for dealing with their rapidly aging population. Australia created a new professional certification for dignity-centered dementia specialists, but perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. The National Association of Home Care Professionals, representing the largely minority and immigrant workforce who provide the majority of hands-on elder care in America, presented Denise with their first-ever Lifetime Achievement Award. "For too long, the people who do this work have been invisible and undervalued," said Maria Santos, the association's president, as she presented the award at their annual conference in Chicago. Denise Washington showed the world that caring for people isn't just a job, it's a profession that requires skill, knowledge, and artistry. She proved that the hands-on caregivers who spend their days with our most vulnerable citizens aren't just changing bedsheets and dispensing medications. They're preserving dignity, protecting memories, and honoring the full humanity of every person they serve. The standing ovation lasted nearly 10 minutes. In the audience were hundreds of women and men, mostly people of color, who had spent their careers providing intimate care for elderly Americans while being paid minimum wage and receiving little recognition for their expertise. Many wiped away tears as they finally felt seen and valued for work they had always known was important, but society had consistently undervalued. After the ceremony, Denise was approached by countless caregivers who shared their own stories of small victories and profound connections with the people they served. A young man from El Salvador told her about the World War II veteran who only spoke Spanish during his final months, allowing them to share stories about their respective countries. A woman from the Philippines described how she helped a retired opera singer remember favorite arias by humming them during daily care routines. "You gave us language for what we already knew," said Janet Thompson, a certified nursing assistant from Birmingham who had driven 8 hours to attend the conference. "We always knew that each person we care for has a whole lifetime of experiences and relationships that matter. But now we have research to back up what our hearts told us was true." These conversations reinforced Denise's belief that the most profound expertise about dementia care often came not from medical textbooks, but from the daily experiences of the people who provided hands-on care with patience, creativity, and love. The validation from her professional peers led to new opportunities to influence policy at the highest levels. When Congress held hearings on improving care for America's aging population, Denise was invited to testify about the economic benefits of dignity-centered approaches. "Senators," she said, addressing the packed hearing room in Washington, "we can continue to warehouse elderly Americans in institutional settings that treat symptoms instead of people, Or we can invest in approaches that reduce emergency room visits, decrease medication costs, and keep families engaged in caregiving. The choice isn't just moral, it's financial. Her testimony, backed by 5 years of outcome data, helped secure federal funding for dignity-centered care training programs across the country. The legislation, dubbed the Joseph Hartwell Act, in honor of the man whose story had started it all, allocated $500 million over 5 years to train healthcare workers in person-centered dementia care approaches. Marcus, now 23, and married with his first child on the way, attended the bill-signing ceremony at the White House. As he watched Denise shake hands with the president, he thought about his grandfather's final words, about the difference between the right choice and the easy choice. He would be so proud, Marcus whispered to his wife, Sarah, as they stood in the rose garden surrounded by healthcare advocates and policymakers. Not just of what Denise accomplished, but of what it proves about treating people with dignity. Grandpa Joe always said that when you do right by people, it comes back to you in ways you never expected. The ripple effects of the Hartwell story continued to expand in unexpected directions. Harvard Business School developed a case study about the company's decision to reject the merger, using it to teach students about stakeholder capitalism and long-term value creation. The case became one of the most popular in the school's curriculum, with students consistently noting that the story challenged their assumptions about the relationship between profit and purpose. Hartwell Furniture itself became a laboratory for innovative business practices. Marcus implemented a policy where every employee received paid time off to care for aging family members, and the company partnered with local healthcare providers to offer on-site geriatric care consultations. The employee retention rate reached 95%, virtually unheard of in retail, and customer loyalty surveys consistently ranked Hartwell among the top furniture companies in the nation. People buy from us because they trust us, Marcus explained during a keynote speech at a retail industry conference. And they trust us because they see how we treat our own people. When customers watch us support an employee through their father's Alzheimer's diagnosis, they know we'll be there for them when they need help choosing furniture for their own changing needs. The business success validated Joseph's original instincts about the connection between treating people well and building sustainable prosperity. Revenue grew by 30% annually for 5 consecutive years, even as competitors struggled with high turnover and customer dissatisfaction. Meanwhile, Denise's influence extended into medical education itself. Medical schools began requiring students to complete rotations in dignity-centered care settings, exposing future doctors to approaches that prioritized patient experience alongside clinical outcomes. Nursing schools redesigned their geriatric care curricula around person-centered principles rather than purely medical management approaches. We're training a generation of healthcare providers who understand that their job isn't just to treat diseases, explained Dr. Rodriguez, who had become a close collaborator in developing these educational programs. They're learning to care for whole human beings who happen to have medical conditions. The transformation was perhaps most visible in emergency rooms across the country, where elderly patients with dementia had traditionally been seen as difficult cases that disrupted efficient care delivery. Training programs helped staff recognize that what appeared to be combative behavior was often fear and confusion that could be addressed through patient communication and environmental modifications. At Grady Hospital in Atlanta, the same emergency department where Joseph had been treated during his fall, the changes were dramatic. Instead of restraining confused elderly patients or sedating them into compliance, staff learned to use validation techniques, familiar music, and patient explanation to reduce anxiety and improve cooperation with medical procedures. We went from seeing these patients as problems to solve to recognizing them as people to serve, said Dr. Michael Park, the Emergency Department Director. Our patient satisfaction scores for elderly patients increased by 60%, and our staff report much less stress when caring for people with cognitive impairment. The success stories accumulated across every sector of healthcare. Hospitals reported shorter lengths of stay for elderly patients. Nursing homes saw dramatic reductions in the use of antipsychotic medications. Home healthcare agencies found that workers trained in dignity-centered approaches stayed in their jobs longer and reported higher job satisfaction. But perhaps the most meaningful measure of impact came from the families themselves. The Hartwell Foundation began collecting video testimonials from families who had implemented dignity-centered care approaches, creating a library of hope for others facing similar challenges. One video featuring the Chen family from San Francisco captured the transformation perfectly. Mr. Chen, a retired engineer who had immigrated from Taiwan in the 1960s, had been increasingly isolated as his Mandarin became his primary language during Alzheimer's progression. Traditional care approaches had focused on trying to maintain his English communication skills. But his daughter learned to meet him in his linguistic comfort zone, practicing her own rusty Mandarin to share conversations about his childhood in Taiwan and his early years building a life in America. The videos showed a man who had seemed lost and agitated, transformed into someone who could share stories, express affection, and participate meaningfully in family gatherings. "We got my father back," his daughter said through tears in her testimonial. Not the father from last year, but the father from his whole life. All of his experiences, all of his love, all of his wisdom, it was still there. We just needed to learn how to reach it. These stories, shared through the Foundation's website and social media channels, reached millions of families worldwide. The comment sections became virtual support groups where adult children shared strategies, celebrated small victories, and encouraged each other through the challenges of caring for loved ones with dementia. 10 years after that first desperate challenge from a 17-year-old CEO, Denise Washington had fundamentally changed how America thought about aging, memory, and dignity. The approach that began with one family's crisis had become a movement that touched millions of lives. But she never forgot that it all started with an old man who loved Perry Como, a young man who learned to listen, and the simple recognition that every human being deserves to be seen and valued for who they are, not just for what they can remember. Today, if you walk into any Hartwell furniture store, you'll still hear that old Philco radio playing in the background. The music changes throughout the day. Big band in the morning for the early shoppers who remember those songs from their youth, classic rock in the afternoon for the middle-aged customers, contemporary hits in the evening for younger families. But every day at exactly 3:30 p.m., the radio plays Perry Como's Catch a Falling Star. It's become a tradition that employees and regular customers anticipate, a daily reminder that everyone who walks through those doors carries their own constellation of memories, experiences, and dreams that deserve to be honored and preserved. In the corporate headquarters, there's a simple plaque in the main conference room where Joseph made his final business decision. It reads, "Some things can't be bought or sold. They can only be earned and preserved." Below it, in smaller text, is a line that Denise suggested, "In memory of Joseph Hartwell, who taught us that dignity is not a luxury, it's a necessity." Marcus, now a father of 3 and president of an 8-state furniture empire, still visits that conference room when he faces difficult decisions. He sits in the same chair his grandfather occupied during those final lucid moments and asks himself the question that has guided every major choice since: what would honor both memory and hope? The answer, he's learned, is almost always the same. You treat people like they matter. You build systems that support their dignity. You make choices based on values rather than convenience. And you remember that the most important victories happen not in boardrooms or bank accounts, but in quiet moments when human beings choose to see and honor the full humanity in each other. If this story moved you, I'd love to hear about someone in your own family whose dignity and worth deserve to be recognized, regardless of what time or illness may have taken away. Share their name in the comments below. Sometimes the most powerful tribute we can offer is simply to say that someone mattered and that their story continues to matter today.